Hi everyone, back here again with Jim DeCamp, uh, talking about ways in which today's veterans experience the coming home from a war, as it may bounce off the experience of Harlan Warren that's at the center of our story here. Um, Certainly in Harlan's time, okay, he was living through a similar revolution in technology of all kinds. Okay, the 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 creation of the railroad is actually the thing that actually led to the destruction of his farm. But also this other major new technology that emerges in the 1850s and 60s of the photograph. Okay, so when someone is telling the story of something that is happening, and you want a visual, it's no longer a drawing or a lithograph. It is an actual image of people and places, and it brings those images into the living room for the first time. I think about the comparison between that famous drawing that we have of the Boston Massacre,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
in the Revolutionary War, okay, and then change or shift from the impact of that kind of image to the impact of the Brady photographs
Mm-hmm.
from the Civil War, only a couple decades later, and how different that is for the people at home to have some brief connection, brief experience to it. Certainly during Vietnam, we saw a similar explosion of photographic technology, the ability to turn around film and photographs quickly and get it back across the ocean to the public here. So I just want to talk a little bit about, as a person coming home, okay, what is the impact of these kinds of images in terms of how you talk to people, and kind of mediate that experience you had with folks that are only seeing pictures.
Right. Right. Well, the thing that what amazed me is that all dead bodies look alike. That those Civil War dead bodies look like the dead bodies that we loaded onto helicopters, and I'm sure like the dead bodies that are in Gaza today, and in Kiev and all around the world. So there's a common humanity that we enjoy and suffer, and that picture of those Confederate dead could be in any war.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the famous World War II photo somewhere in Spain where the guy was photographed right when he was shot. He had a long rifle and he's moving, and it's a famous picture. And
Okay.
we see him die. We see him die in the picture. And of course, in Vietnam, the heart-rending part was the families that were back in the United States watching the evening news.
Yeah.
And we've given lots of discussions in schools, and one of the more pertinent questions they ask us is, would you do it again? And, Roger Johnson, whose son was born with disabilities from Agent Orange and died at a young age, said, yeah, I would, because my country called on me, and it's an obligation you have for your country. And Tony Gurak, who was a B-52 pilot, seeking revenge for the death of Butch Rosborough and Bobby Henderson, his classmates, said, yeah, I'd do it again too. Mm-hmm. And then they come to me, and as much as I enjoy the privilege of being a veteran, I say, no, I wouldn't do it again. I would have run away. My only choices were jail, exclusion, or getting drafted. And they said, well, why? I said, my mother lost her favorite brother at the end of World War II when she was pregnant with me. And she was convinced she was going to see me every night on the news. And even when I was a clerk, the most of my service in Vietnam was as a clerk. It didn't make any difference to her. I was 11,000 miles away out of her control, and she had to watch it every night. Yeah. And, you see pictures of the early Civil War where people went out in carriages to watch.
Yeah.
They're up on a hillside, as if it's some sort of event, and I think they were quickly disabused of that by pictures like this, that you're not going to enjoy what you see. So now, with instantaneous communication, but they've tried to, the government has tried to keep the reporters away from that. We see it in other places. We see it in Ukraine every day. The New York Times does an excellent job. Picture on today's paper was people in a metro station trying to avoid the bombs, and strangely enough, still obeying traffic signals, do not walk signs when they're above ground. So those revolutions, and now of course, I'm sure soldiers have their phones with them and stuff like that, and they probably can take pictures and instantaneously connect us.
Yeah.
But those changes, the telegraph and the fact that America was suddenly interconnected, and I'm sure there must have been dozens of photographers who followed Brady once they saw how lucrative it was and how interested people were. It must have made a profound difference on the attitudes.
Yeah.
And it's that those 242 people that died in a week, we've fought whole wars where people haven't died, 242 people haven't died,
Right. So this is the Life
magazine.
Life magazine article in June 1969.
Right,
okay,
right.
Where they showed all of those images of those men that died in a single week.
And Life magazine was profoundly influential in those days. I mean, everybody got it. It was huge, and it was a picture magazine, and it was replaced a lot of stuff that we would have today. But that made a difference in America because, they were boys, most of them, they were young boys. And just the enormity of it, I can't remember how many pages it was, but it took you a while to flip through it and then just say that was a week. So you multiply that times 52. And I of course had the good fortune of going a year later when things were quieter. Right. But there were some times in Vietnam and then so if we had 242 dead, we had 1,000 wounded, maybe seriously wounded. We probably killed 10,000 or wounded 10,000 of the quote unquote enemy. So the repercussions, and America just had to stop and think, oh wow, I've tried to avoid this, or I haven't really paid that much attention. I don't watch the news, but I do like Life magazine, and my father collected Life magazines, and they stayed in the garage till they molded.
Sure.
But that was, you thought that was something you had to have. You should hang on to Life magazines. So I don't know what's comparable. You see pictures every once in a while. You see pictures of immigrant babies that wash up on shores on the Mediterranean. That catches our attention briefly, but it doesn't really translate into policy. And I don't think we've seen anything comparable. And I'm sure that it took a long while. I don't know how well photographed World War I was. Certainly there's some great movies and great books written about it. World War II, of course, we had embedded reporters, Edward R. Murrow, and
right.
But and then when Walter Cronkite turned against Vietnam, when he turned against Vietnam, the war was over. And Johnson said that we've lost Cronkite, we've lost America.
Yeah.
And and Cronkite was slow to realize. He wasn't in the vanguard. So it's it's more of the same. I guess,
Sure.
It's a little disconcerting to have to say that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to imagining what Harlan's experience might have been. Okay, certainly some of those photos would have made it back here to Livingston County for people to see, but also there were the much more congratulatory kinds of images of images of the 33rd Regiment, brass band, for which Harlan was likely a member of. That I'm also thinking that even for me growing up here, that attending square dances as a little kid in New York Town Hall, one of the tunes that is still played for for square dances here is Marching Through Georgia. Okay, that congratulatory song of that just brutal campaign that wiped out so many Southerners and so many Southern towns and men doing horrible things during that. That's still a tune that we square dance to here, and I can only imagine, okay, what Harlan would have felt coming back, okay, and then attending those social dances, and having that tune being played. It's just, I can only imagine what that might have felt like.
There's the 1,000-yard stare. They refer to it as that long look that soldiers and veterans have.
1,000-yard stare.
Yeah. And you don't get it unless you were there. We've talked before about the metaphor was, have you been to see the elephant? Meaning, have you been in battle?
Mm-hmm.
Because when the elephants came to town, these small towns and these one-ring circuses, that was the biggest event of the year. And the most extraordinary thing they've ever seen. I mean, the fact that there's elephants in America, so and the elephants show up at the York Fair. They've been to see the elephant. So
okay.
So that's what they would ask each other. You wouldn't say, have you been in combat? And Meyer was, have you been in the shit? Which is probably a better metaphor for what it was, but not as eloquent.
Yeah.
So to get back to the issue of visualization, and you can't get away from that. You can turn your eyes, but you've already seen it. And that's this image right here of the fallen soldiers. And as I said, everybody dies in the same pattern. It's that's being replicated around the globe right this afternoon as we speak. And people die in those same poses.
Right.
And they were, they were young men. They were believers in the cause, probably the lost cause, they call it in the Southerners, And it's kind of an ignoble cause to lose your life for, but that was their way of life and the way they were brought up. And I don't think they saw the inhumanity of it. And who knows, what had happened if they had won.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So the fact that some people they need to see something to believe something, And that Life magazine thing, I can remember that because America just paused and said, "Oh my God, that's the wall is impressive, the 59,000 names on it, but it's kind of they run into each other and it's kind of panel to panel and unless you're looking for an individual name to do a rubbing, it's it's deep and it's profound and it's moving, but you move on, you walk on.
Yeah.
That magazine, I don't know what the sales of it were, whether they spiked, but I don't know what was the week after or the week before.
Yeah, right, sure.
And I don't know who was brilliant enough to do that, to compile those pictures. But it's one young face after another. Right. And I know, the ripple effect of that, because I know what happened to my mother. She was in Italy 40 years later with Doreen. And they were having lunch outside somewhere, and she saw a signpost to a village where my uncle Bill had fought, and she broke into tears. Yeah. And Doreen said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh, Bill was there." So profound.
Well, thank you for these stories and insights. I hope this starts more conversations out there with folks to reach out to their friends and relatives that have served. So,
it's a very interesting project that you're embarking on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.